I would like to call to order the Planning Commission meeting for the Town of Tyrone for this April 22nd, 2021 meeting. With the first order of business and approval of the agenda, can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Carries. Moving on to approval of the minutes from the February 25th, 2021 meeting. Motion.
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Any issues? Vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Moving on to the next item, which is a public hearing. Consideration of a rezoning from applicant Daniel
Dalkey.
Dalkey. Okay, sorry about that. A 14.7 acre tract with parcel number 0736074 from M2 Heavy Industrial with conditions to M2 Heavy Industrial.
All right, so the only item on the agenda this evening is a petition from Mr. Dalkey. This petition is for parcel 0736 from M2 conditional to M2, I believe with no conditions. The expressed intent was for the construction of, I believe, a concrete facility. I'll let the applicant speak more to that if he wishes. This particular property does have quite a bit of history with the town. The subject property is the largest tract of Phase 8 of Shamrock Industrial Park, which had a zoning condition placed on it in the year 2000. This zoning condition is a construction moratorium that was placed on the property and the occupancy of the property until a secondary emergency ingress-egress drive was constructed into the industrial park. This was a condition on the original developer, Howard Guthrie, and it was placed as a zoning condition on all of the remaining properties in Phase 8. So this property, as well as on your screens here, the three properties to the west, I believe owned by the owner of Ivy Green Lawn Care in the industrial park. This secondary access has not been constructed, although much effort has been put into finding opportunities for the construction of this drive over the past many years. There is currently, to this day, a single point of ingress and egress into and out of the industrial park over the CSX rail line. Due to railroad construction, emergencies, or other situation, the train has blocked this crossing for sometimes hours at a time. Sometimes this happens 2 to 3 times a year. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all in terms of a large, major blocking of the track. To date, no emergency has occurred simultaneous with the blocking of the crossing, but it has disrupted business operations, causing traffic delays on both sides of the crossing. The existing zoning, M2 heavy industrial with conditions, the condition being the construction of emergency ingress-egress access drive until the property can be occupied or constructed upon. The proposed zoning is M2 heavy industrial without those conditions. The existing land use includes basically vacant production and employment land from our future land use category. The surrounding zoning to the north is agricultural residential. To the south is heavy industrial. To the east is agricultural residential. And to the west is heavy industrial. There are currently no site improvements on the property, and the size of the property is approximately 14.7 acres. In regards to compatibility with the future development map and comprehensive plan, the petition to M2 is normally consistent with the future development map and comp plan in general. This property lies within the production and employment character area, which does permit M2 heavy industrial zoning. The property is also located adjacent to other M2 zone properties. Specific site conditions, zoning considerations, and property history should be taken into account for this determination. If we kind of read through the minutes of the council meeting since the year 2000. There was an expressed concern about only having one entrance in and out of the park, and the blocking of the train of the industrial park causing an emergency access problem for fire, EMS, police, and the like. In terms of compatibility with the zoning ordinance and impact assessment of the property, going through those questions in the ordinance, will the zoning permit suitable uses with surrounding properties? It's staff's assessment that under normal hazard and access conditions, the proposed zoning would be suitable with the surrounding properties to the south and west. It is adjoined by residential on the north and eastern portion of the property. However, a 100-foot buffer is required as a part of that zoning district to accommodate for any potential nuisance adjoining a residential. Will zoning adversely affect adjacent properties? Under normal hazard conditions and access conditions to the industrial park, this zoning would not adversely affect adjacent properties to the west and the south any more than what is typical. Residential properties to the north and east, like I said, may be adversely affected. However, the development conditions, including buffers, would be present on the property to protect the impact. This petition will also adversely affect other property owners in Phase 8 who may be, as a result of this petition, if it were to go through, be disproportionately burdened with the current zoning condition if they are lifted for select properties, being this one and not others. So this condition was placed on all properties in Phase 8. One is being petitioned for right now to remove that condition, which would result in a disproportionate burden of that condition placed on other properties. Does the property have reasonable economic use as currently zoned? Given that there is a construction moratorium placed on the property, reasonable economic use has been suspended until safety conditions via secondary access have been provided to the industrial park. The sale of this property has occurred multiple times since the zoning condition was placed on the property in 2000. So the condition and subsequent value as a result of that condition has been known by each owner. So current economic use. Would the property zoning result in a use which will or could be excessively burdensome on existing infrastructure? This is kind of the key point in keeping with the conditions placed by council years ago. It's staff's understanding that it would. The proposed removal of the construction moratorium without the provision of a secondary ingress-egress access point for emergency vehicles would exacerbate the current burden on emergency and police services to access the businesses and the people in the industrial park in the case of an emergency, with the train, of course, blocking the primary entrance into the park. Staff does recommend maintaining construction moratorium on the property until secondary emergency ingress-egress is provided into the industrial park. If this access is provided, then there would be very little reason to deny construction on the property.
This is a public hearing. We'll have two separate periods, one for anyone wishing to speak in favor of this change, and then a time for anyone who wishes to speak in opposition. So with that being said, I will at this point open the portion of the hearing for anyone who wishes to speak in favor of this change. Come forward. Like to say?
Yes, sir. How are you guys this evening? As you know, we're interested in purchasing that track to build a concrete facility on. I've spoke with Fire Chief Karanda, and he felt that moving forward with the development on this would be acceptable to him. Knowing that if everybody knew the situation, with the egress, is a possible problem. There's not much that probably can be done to get that second entrance built. So, with that in mind, in the last couple lots in the whole park, kind of makes sense to go ahead, move forward, and get those developed and contribute resources and funds back to the community. Me personally, I don't see why it would cause any more burden than there is already. If there was a situation with a train, I know we buy materials a lot from Central, Site One in there, and there's been a couple times where the train has been an issue, when they've done some construction on the tracks, and they've let them know ahead, there's gonna be shut down, so we can kind of plan ahead for stuff like that. That's all I have to say. Thank you, guys.
Just your name and address, if you don't
Daniel
mind.
Galkey, 970 Alley, 222.
Anyone else who would like to speak in favor of this rezoning request?
Not at this meeting.
I will close that portion of the public hearing and now open it for anyone who would wish to speak in opposition to this change. I'll close that portion of the public hearing. And comments.
Yeah, I drove back there, looked at the property. And I get it, as far as getting across that railroad, I'm trying to figure out what other way we could get a road. That's been the whole issue, and I'm assuming the property owner, Philip, on the north side, that's not something that can happen?
I'm not sure, that property owner would need to be approached. I believe, just kind of historically speaking, that the property owner to the north was approached, and there was difficulty having that conversation. But, looking back at the minutes, this is, 10 or more years ago. So things could certainly have changed with that property owner. And it kind of depends on where, a planned emergency ingress egress access would go as to how many property owners would be involved. Historically speaking, this power easement here that straddles the quarry property and the Slayton's property was kind of eyed as the potential for that access easement or that emergency access. And I'm not really sure what the current state of conversations is on that particular property, mostly because that was pursued by previous owners. It was individual conversations. The town tried to facilitate some of those conversations, but not directly involved.
Is
And
that-
I have to agree with you. What's another parcel in there? We still have the railroad track, and everybody is having to get across that railroad. I mean, that's the way it's gonna be. That property is unfortunate that now we've got dumping on that property. It's already curbed and guttered, there's already water down there, it's ready to roll. I hate seeing a burden, and if the fire chief doesn't really care, even though back 10 years ago, it was an issue, we're not getting that issue now from the fire chief now. So that's my problem, is they have got this property, and until somebody builds another entrance to Noy Road, I don't see that happening, because you have to deal with that railroad track. That's my thoughts on it.
Who's ultimately responsible for creating that access point? But is there an association within Shamrock Industrial?
There is,
How would that, I mean, obviously, there's gonna have to be some easements granted cut across those properties to the north of Logwood, so I know this has been going back, 20 years or more now, so what's been the conversations historically about how the best way is to ultimately has to pay for it?
To my understanding, there is no business owner or property owner association in the industrial park. In terms of responsibility, in 2000, when the property or the industrial park was originally developed, that responsibility was placed directly on the developer. What I think complicates, things as it stands now is that that developer never followed through with that particular requirement. And eventually that developer's company went bankrupt and the ownership of that land left the ownership of the developer. So the responsibility, is kind of a question of, it's originally for the developer, and he essentially burdened the future property owners of that land with that requirement. And so that's kind of where, from just that perspective, I don't want to go too far into that, but that's originally how it was established. The town recognizes that, especially during the time of placing that condition on the property, that there's a safety concern present. And there've been, the town has tried to facilitate conversations amongst private property owners to try and get them to come together to come to a resolution of this issue and maybe pick up where the developer left off. This area here that, we're talking about is the first and primary option. It's come to staff's attention that further down here, this is Peachtree City is right here. Peachtree City actually had zoned this development here in Crestwind with the condition that there be emergency access, provided to the industrial park at some point if it came down in this direction. If you can kind of see here, this is a homeowner association owned piece of property. They've cut out this lot here, presumably to provide access to the rear of this HOA-owned property, which abuts the industrial park, which also abuts this 50-foot wide strip, which would serve pretty conveniently as an easement or a drive to Cottonwood Circle, which could be an emergency access, drive. Now, that wouldn't be obviously a full-blown secondary entrance into the industrial park, but I believe, just with some interjurisdictional planning, that was kind of teed up to be an option for the industrial park in the future. Now, the town is not really super involved in this. The property owners involved are private property owners, and it would take, conversations with private property owners to accomplish this on this side of the industrial park. But this does open up for a second option.
So, seeing that there's potential for a south connection and a northern connection, usually if you go into a situation where you are trying to acquire a piece of property, during a due diligence period, you see whether or not they have conditions on that land. And so when you make that purchase and there's conditions, then you have to, figure out exactly how am I going to meet these conditions in order to develop this property. Looking at this, the southern piece of land, if that needed to be acquired, looking at the value versus the northern way, I would probably, if it was me and I had that condition where I had to provide access, I would go with the less expensive way in order to do that, in order to develop on my land. If the value of constructing a temporary gravel road is, let's just say 100,000, I'm just making that number up, then if we were to change spot zone and change it to M2 without conditions, we're essentially granting someone $100,000 because they don't have to develop the road, and then the